What if the very idea of childhood as we know it, that sort of special protected time of innocence, play, potential,
Mm.
zero real responsibility, what if that's actually a pretty new thing? Maybe even, well, kind of fragile.
Yeah, we tend to think it's just biological, right? Like it's always been this way for everyone everywhere.
Exactly. But the truth, it's way more complicated and honestly, sometimes pretty damn grim.
Yeah.
Childhood is like a social thing, a historical thing, and it's changed massively, often brutally, over the centuries.
It really has. This idea we have in the West today that a child is somehow inherently separate, needing all this protection and, their own little world to develop in. That's actually the historical outlier in many ways.
Mhm.
For most of human history, kids were just part of the adult world in ways that would probably shock most of us today.
Right. So for this deep dive, we're not just like strolling through history. We're really digging into how the whole idea of the child evolved, specifically in Western society.
We're going from a world where kids were basically, units of labor, property almost, to how we see them now
Yeah.
as these incredibly important emotional, moral centers of our lives. It's a massive shift.
So our mission here is to kind of unpack how what society did often clashed hard with what philosophers were thinking. There are some really wild contradictions.
Absolutely. And crucially, we want to push back on some of those default Western assumptions. We'll bring in perspectives from non-Western cultures, indigenous cultures, which are vital.
Think of this as your shortcut, yeah, to get your head around this huge, complex evolution, packed with stuff that might surprise you, maybe even disturb you a bit, and definitely make you rethink what childhood even means. Okay, so let's jump back, way back. Greco-Roman world. We often get this sort of, romanticized picture, right? Temples, togas.
Sure, the highlight reel. But for kids, it was anything but romantic. The first thing that just jumps out is how conditional their value was.
Conditional. How so?
Well, basically, a child only mattered, only had real value if they were formally accepted into the family, into the state. Before that, legally, socially.
Disposable.
Disposable. Wow. It's a chilling concept for us, isn't it? But yeah, before our modern ideas took hold, childhood wasn't this automatic right to protection. It was more like a shaky privilege you had to earn, either through being useful or getting that formal thumbs up.
And what drove that disposability? This wasn't just like a casual attitude, it was baked into the law.
Oh, absolutely. In Rome, you had patria potestas. That's the fathers, the paterfamilias, near absolute power. And we're not just talking discipline here.
Right.
He controlled everything. Education, marriage, their labor. Hell, even whether they lived or died initially, Greece had something similar with the Kyrios.
So kids had basically no rights, couldn't own anything.
But virtually none, couldn't own property.
Yeah.
And you even had big shot philosophers like Plato, Aristotle, explicitly lumping kids in with women, slaves, animals, basically viewing them as not yet fully formed people, just waiting to become adults.
Not yet fully formed. God, that's clinical.
Yeah.
Brutal almost. And it allowed for some really horrific stuff, didn't it? Infanticide, exposure.
Yeah, and it was widespread, legally sanctioned too. A father could just reject a newborn. Why? Maybe it was a girl seen as a financial drain, needing a dowry. Or maybe the baby had physical defects. Or he doubted paternity. Or they were just too poor. There's this infamous Roman letter that basically says, if it's a boy, keep it. If it's a girl, get rid of it.
Jeez.
And those babies left out, exposed, if they somehow survived. They often ended up as slaves, destined for a life of forced labor from the get-go.
Which brings us to child labor. Not some social ill they worried about, but just normal, essential even.
Absolutely the norm. Families needed it to survive. The paterfamilias could use his kids' labor directly or even, rent them out.
Rent them out.
Yeah, for a fee.
Yeah.
And the evidence we find is just heartbreaking. There's a tombstone from Roman Spain, 4-year-old boy named Portulus. He's shown holding a little miner's pickaxe and basket.
4 years old.
4. And you find skeletal remains from that time. Kids' bones showing clear signs of extreme physical stress. Hard labor in workshops, fields. It wasn't playing around. It was back-breaking stuff that literally marked their bodies.
Okay, but despite all this brutality, this disposability, there's a bit of a paradox, right? We know there was affection. How do those two things even coexist?
That's where you get concepts like pietas. It's this idea of a mutual duty between parents and kids. Parents raise and teach. Kids honor and support their parents later. It wasn't just cold transaction. It was a deep sense of obligation.
Okay.
And in Greece, you had the amphidromia ceremony. Happened around day 5 after birth. That was the key moment. Before that ritual, the baby's disposable.
Yeah.
After, they're in. a recognized member of the family.
So the grief we see sometimes, like on tombstones or in writings, that wasn't for the newborn who was rejected. It was for the child who'd been accepted, integrated. Their personhood, their emotional value was something given to them, not inherent.
Exactly. It explains that stark contrast, the cold rejection of newborns versus the real sorrow for recognized children. It was about social status, not just biology.
And marriage, too. Completely unsentimental.
Totally. It was explicitly about making babies. The Romans had a phrase for it. Luberum quenondorum casa, for the sake of getting children.
Charm.
Right. And the legal ages were insane. 12 for girls, 14 for boys in Rome, maybe a bit older in Greece, like 14 to 16 for girls. But these were arranged marriages, pure strategy by the fathers, alliances, money.
The kids' feelings were just irrelevant.
Pretty much. Especially the brides. They were just pieces in a game meant to produce heirs. That was their job.
Okay, so that's antiquity. Pretty bleak picture.
Uh-huh.
Moving into the medieval era, did things change much? Did some of that harshness stick around? This is where we get that famous miniature adult idea, right? From Philippe Ariès.
Yeah, and it's often misunderstood. People think Ariès meant parents just didn't give a damn about their kids. That's not quite it.
What was his point then?
His argument was more subtle. He said medieval culture didn't really have a specific awareness of childhood as something fundamentally different from adulthood. Once kids hit about age 7, they were basically just integrated into the adult world. Same work, same social life, even similar clothes. No separate kid zone.
So for most people, the peasants, childhood was short, tough, and all about farm work from a super young age. Tending animals, helping harvest, just survival mode.
Totally. And in towns, you had the apprenticeship system that kind of formalized child labor. Kids, sometimes as young as 7 or 8, shipped off to live with a master craftsman.
Right, learn a trade.
Yeah, but it wasn't like school. They provided years of labor unskilled at first, then skilled, and in return got training, food, a place to sleep. It wasn't seen as cruel, it was how you integrated socially and economically.
And it was a way to deal with orphans, poor kids too.
Often, yes. A form of social welfare, really. The master basically acted in loco parentis in place of the parent. Had legal authority, much like that old patria potestas, just in a different setting.
And obviously, your social class determined everything.
Yeah.
Noble boys off to castles at 7 to become pages, then knights. Noble girls learning how to run huge estates.
While peasant kids got zero formal schooling. Just learned whatever skills they needed to survive day to day.
But even with this miniature adult thing, there were some distinctions, right? Laws, religion.
Oh, yeah, definitely. English common law, for instance, said childhood ended at 12. After that, you were legally responsible. Canon law set minimum marriage ages 12 for girls, 14 for boys. Contracts could be made earlier, but they weren't binding till puberty, and, importantly, consent.
Consent, okay.
But the main takeaway. The medieval idea of childhood was mostly functional. That shift around age 7 out of infancy. That's when you became useful economically or socially. It was about what you could do, not some deep inner state of being a child.
Okay, so the pre-modern kid. Functional, working, often treated like property. Then, bam, the 18th century Enlightenment comes along and just detonates that whole concept. This is where our modern sentimental view really starts, isn't it? And John Locke is huge here.
Absolutely pivotal. Locke basically threw out the old idea of innate sin, that kids are born bad. Instead, he said, a child's mind is like a white paper, devoid of all characters. The famous tabula rasa.
The blank slate.
Exactly. Which put this massive new responsibility on parents, on educators. For Locke, kids weren't born good or evil, they were shaped by their experiences. So adults had to carefully mold them into rational, good people, using gentle guidance, not just beating it into them.
But then you get Rousseau, who kind of goes in the opposite direction almost.
Yeah, Rousseau was radical. He took Locke's idea and flipped it. He argued kids are born inherently good, and it's society that screws them up.
Right. Emile.
Exactly.
Yeah.
His big idea was let kids develop naturally, follow their own interests. This was revolutionary, suggesting kids had distinct developmental stages. He even pushed for mothers to breastfeed, not just for nutrition, which was known, but for the emotional bond. That was a direct hit against the upper classes who used wet nurses.
But there was a catch, a pretty big one, especially for girls.
Oh, absolutely. A deeply problematic gender split. Emile, the boy, gets educated for freedom, for citizenship. Sophie, the girl, her education is designed to please, to be useful to us men.
Yeah, Wolf is right. That sets the stage for the whole 19th century separate spheres thing.
Definitely laid the groundwork.
And these ideas, Locke's and Rousseau's, they really caught fire with the Romantic movement later on, didn't they? Suddenly, childhood is this sacred thing.
Totally. Think Wordsworth Blake. Childhood becomes this state of pure innocence, kids trailing clouds of glory closer to God. This cult of the child emerges, framing kids as economically valueless but emotionally priceless. Fragile little beings needing constant adult protection.
But that creates this weird tension, doesn't it? This contradiction that we still live with.
It's the core contradiction, I think. On one hand, the Enlightenment says the child is natural, needs freedom. On the other, Romanticism turns childhood into this intensely managed project. You need this super-controlled, sheltered, frankly unnatural environment to preserve that supposed natural innocence.
Huh. Yeah, let them be natural by bubble wrapping them.
Exactly. And that push-pull between letting kids be free and intensively shaping them, that is modern Western parenting, right down to today. We're still wrestling with it.
Okay, so while philosophers are getting all sentimental, the Industrial Revolution kicks into high gear and creates this absolutely brutal counter-reality, just an insane demand for cheap labor. And kids were the ideal workers.
In the eyes of the industrialists, yeah.
Yeah.
Because you could pay them peanuts, 10, 20% of adult wages. They were seen as easier to manage, easier to discipline, and sometimes their small size was literally an advantage.
Do what kinds of jobs?
Horrible stuff. Kids as young as 4 or 5 working 12, 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. The conditions were just hellish.
Give us some examples. Paint the picture.
Okay, imagine mule scavengers in textile mills. Tiny kids crawling under moving machines to pick up cotton scraps. They'd get crushed, lose limbs, even get decapitated.
Oh my God.
Girls in match factories developed phossy jaw. From the phosphorus fumes, their jawbones would literally rot away. Grotesque. Kids called hurriers dragged heavy coal carts in mines, crawling through tunnels too low for adults. Breaker boys sat for hours sorting coal from rock and thick dust, leading to lung disease, constant accidents.
And the worst off were the pauper apprentices, basically sold off.
Yeah, orphans or kids from destitute families, sold by the parish workhouses. Worked for no wages, just meager food and lodging, often facing extreme neglect and really savage abuse. It was deplorable, truly.
It's stomach-churning. How the hell did anyone justify this? What was the logic?
Well, there was a desperation of poverty. Families needed the money, however little. Industrialists bleated about national economic growth.
Of course.
And you still had these lingering, twisted, puritanical ideas that hard work kept kids from sin, from idleness, from degeneracy. Some people actually argued that certain factory tasks were better done by little girls from 6 to 12 years old than by grown men.
Unbelievable.
The human cost just didn't factor in for profit and this warped morality.
Thank God there was pushback. A reform movement started, right? Religious groups, unions, activists.
Yes, a moral crusade. They didn't just complain about the conditions, they attacked the whole idea that child labor was okay. They hammered home how it destroyed health, morals, and denied kids any chance of education.
And publicity was key. People like Louis Hine, the photographer.
Hugely important. Hine's photos in the U.S., muckraking journalists, they showed the grim reality to the middle class, who were largely unaware or chose to ignore it. That shock and outrage were crucial fuel for change.
But getting laws passed was a slog. Britain's Factory Act of 1833, that was a big first step.
A major milestone, yeah. Banned work for kids under 9, limited hours for 9 to 13-year-olds, and significantly mandated 2 hours of school a day. Then the Mines Act in 1842 banned all females and boys under 10 from working underground. Baby steps, but vital ones.
But the real game changer, the thing that actually got kids out of factories in large numbers, was making school compulsory.
That was the killer app, basically.
Yeah.
If kids legally had to be in school, they couldn't be in the factory.
Right, takes them off the market.
Exactly. The 1870 Education Act in the UK set up national schools, and the 1880 Act made attendance mandatory from 5 to 10. Similar laws spread across the U.S. state by state until all states had them by 1918.
And finally, federal regulation in the U.S.
Yeah, after some earlier attempts got struck down, the big one was the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938. That set the national minimum age at 16 for most work, 18 for hazardous jobs. That's still the foundation of U.S. child labor law today. A hard-won victory for the idea of childhood we now take for granted.
Okay, so the 20th century finally sees the sentimental revolution kind of win out, at least in the West. We get the emotionally priceless child as the standard, this huge shift from kids being useful economic units to being emotionally central. How did that actually happen?
Well, sociologist Viviana Zelizer wrote this incredible book, Pricing the Priceless Child. Her argument was that roughly between 1870 and 1930, that useful 19th century kid, valued for work, got completely replaced by the 20th century, economically useless but emotionally priceless child. She called it the sacralization of childhood. Suddenly, a properly loved child, regardless of class, belonged in this separate world: school, games, nurture, not the workshop or field. Their value wasn't what they earned, but what they meant emotionally.
But here's the really weird part, Zalezer pointed out. Making kids priceless didn't actually remove money from the equation, did it?
Not at all. It just changed how money figured in. Suddenly, you see the rise of things like children's life insurance,
Mm.
and courts started awarding monetary damages if a child was killed through negligence, putting a dollar value on that supposedly priceless emotional loss.
Wow. So we needed a way to quantify the unquantifiable.
Seems so. It reveals this deep urge to put a number on even the most sacred things. We found new ways to price the invaluable.
And eventually, this whole Western ideal gets enshrined in international law.
Absolutely. The culmination is the 1989 UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, or UNCRC. It's the most widely ratified human rights treaty in history.
And it defines a child under 18 and lists all these rights: education, play, protection from exploitation.
Crucially, it establishes the principle of the best interests of the child as the primary consideration in everything concerning them. It's built around providing for them, protecting them, and allowing them to participate.
So it basically locks in that specific Western model,
Mm.
protected, nurtured individual.
That's pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the global institutional stamp on that ideal.
Mm-hmm.
But things keep evolving.
How so? What's the 21st century twist?
Well, now the priceless child isn't just emotionally priceless. The investment is increasingly about developing their human capital for the future economy. They're less economically useless and more like a long-term investment project.
Ah, the useful to be child.
Exactly. Look at the explosion in spending: parental spending, state spending on early childhood education, intensive parenting, endless extracurriculars. It's all about managing their present to maximize their future market value. It's a new kind of utility, dressed up in the language of love and potential.
Okay, so we've mapped out this journey to the Western priceless child. But we absolutely have to stress this is not universal. It's specific to our culture, our history. Trying to impose it everywhere else is, well, ethnocentric.
Pretty deeply ethnocentric, and it often clashes hard with how childhood works in non-Western or indigenous cultures. Plus, let's be honest, the Western model is largely a luxury afforded by wealth.
You can only afford to keep kids out of work if the family doesn't need their labor to eat.
Precisely. In subsistence economies, everyone has to contribute, including kids. Trying to export the non-working child ideal without fixing the underlying poverty is pointless, even damaging.
And in many of those societies, our rigid lines between work and play, or kids' worlds and adults' worlds, just don't exist in the same way. We need to separate exploitative child labor from what you might call socially integrated children's work, right?
That distinction is critical. For example, in rural Bolivia, kids might take on serious responsibilities from age 5. In many African farming communities, kids helping plant, harvest, heard of that. That's just normal. It's seen as education, as contributing valuably.
So Western campaigns to just end child labor everywhere can actually backfire.
They absolutely can. They risk wrecking local economies and leaving kids with nothing, no purpose, no sense of belonging, if their contribution is suddenly forbidden without providing an alternative.
And the whole authority thing can be totally different too, challenging our ideas about parents being in charge.
Wildly different sometimes. Among the Tekopia in the Solomon Islands, a kid's obedience isn't demanded. It's seen as a gift the child chooses to give.
Wow.
Or the Inuit, they traditionally treated young kids with immense tolerance because they believed they hadn't developed reason of humor yet. Discipline came later. Or think about the Semai in Malaysia. Kids there have incredible autonomy, handling tools like machetes in ways that would give a Western parent a heart attack.
Total trust.
A different kind of trust, yeah, based on different assumptions about capability and learning.
And indigenous perspectives often go even deeper, beyond just work. How do they tend to see children?
Often as sacred gifts, literally from the Creator.
Mm-hmm.
Raising them isn't just the parent's job, it's a collective thing: extended family, elders, the whole community's involved. Development is holistic, spiritual, emotional, cultural identity are key. Learned through stories, ceremonies, just doing things alongside adults.
Not separating them out.
Exactly. The child is often seen as an equal member of the community from early on. Interactions are more about participating with them, not doing things to them. It's a fundamentally different relationship.
And we have to end this section with a reality check. Despite our Western ideal, child labor and child marriage are still massive global problems.
Soberingly massive. Estimates are around 160 million kids in child labor globally, over 60% in agriculture, often unpaid family work. And yeah, even in the U.S., exemptions in labor laws mean hundreds of thousands of kids, mostly from migrant families, work in agriculture.
And child marriage.
Still affects around 12 million girls every single year. And it persists even in Western countries through legal loopholes. So this ideal of the protected, priceless child, it's far, far from a universal reality. It's an ongoing struggle.
Okay, so we've come from antiquity to the present day, this complex, priceless child idea, but the story's still being written. The digital age is throwing up a whole new set of rules, blurring lines between play and labor in ways we're barely understanding.
Totally. In this digital economy, kids aren't just consuming stuff anymore. Think YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. They're prosumers.
Prosumers.
Yeah, producing and consuming at the same time, creating content, sharing it, building communities, while also consuming content. And this turns their leisure time into something researchers are calling playbar.
Playber.
Exactly. Activities that feel like play gaming, making videos, hanging out online are actually generating huge economic value, huge cultural value, mostly for the big tech platforms.
And that structure, it sounds weirdly familiar. It's almost like pre-industrial child labor in a way.
How do you mean?
Well, back then, the kids' unpaid work was an asset for the head of the household, right? Now, their unpaid play barn generates data, engagement, assets that belong to Facebook, Google, TikTok. The kid's doing the activity, but someone else profits most.
That's a really sharp comparison, and it suggests that maybe that 20th century economically useless child was just a temporary phase. We're finding new ways for kids' activities to be economically useful, again, just indirectly.
It's definitely not simple, though. There are huge upsides to the digital world for kids, right?
Yeah.
Learning, creativity, connection.
Oh, immense opportunities. They can build social capital, cultural capital online. They can even translate into real-world economic benefits later. But the downsides are just as big.
Like what?
Problematic internet use, addiction, exposure to harmful stuff, cyberbullying, and this constant low-level commercial exploitation of their personal data. It's insidious.
Are the rules catching up, like that UN convention?
People are trying, applying the principles of the UNCRC to the digital space, pushing tech companies to actually design platforms with kids' rights and safety baked in. It's a huge battleground right now.
And then there's maybe the biggest, scariest new threat of all, climate change.
Yeah, the anthropogenic climate crisis. It's a profound existential threat, and kids are bearing the absolute brunt of it, even though they did the least to cause it.
Their developing bodies, their reliance on adults makes them uniquely vulnerable. The stats are just awful.
The devastating. Something like 88% of the global disease burden from climate change falls on kids under 5. By 2050, projections say over 2 billion children will face frequent, severe heat waves.
2 billion. And this isn't just about health, is it? It hits all those rights we talked about.
Systematically. The right to health and life. Obviously hit by heat, pollution, diseases spreading, malnutrition from crop failures causing permanent developmental damage. Wiped out. Extreme weather destroys schools, forces families to move. We're talking 43 million internal displacements of children over just 6 years recently because of weather disasters. 43 million educations disrupted or ended.
And safety, protection.
Gone. When disaster hits, societies break down. Kids are at huge risk of being separated from families, trafficked, exploited. Social safety nets just vanish. Climate change basically forces us to rethink the best interest of the child on a planetary scale.
It creates this fundamental clash, doesn't it, between our current generation's short-term economic habits and the actual survival prospects of future generations, of all children.
Absolutely. And that's why we're seeing kids and young people stepping up as powerful political voices. Movements like Fridays for Future. They're not just victims anymore.
They're claimants.
Exactly. Active claimants demanding their right to a livable planet. They're changing the conversation, demanding intergenerational justice. Their moral clarity is incredibly potent. Hashtag tag outro.
Wow. What a massive sweep through history. From kids as property, as labor, as tools for dynasty, to becoming symbols of innocence, emotional treasures, and now, well, these complex human capital investments.
It really hammers home the core point. Our modern Western idea of the priceless child, sheltered, schooled, emotionally central, it's not some timeless truth.
Nope, it's specific. a product of very particular philosophical shifts, economic changes, social struggles, and trying to apply it everywhere just doesn't fit the diverse realities of childhood across the globe, especially in non-Western and indigenous contexts where work, community, autonomy look completely different.
And it's definitely not a finished story. The definition of childhood is still absolutely in flux. The digital world is creating new forms of labor, maybe a new kind of economic utility for kids.
While at the same time, the climate crisis is shaking the very foundation's safety, security, basic provision that the whole 20th century ideal was built on. It's changing constantly.
So the kid of the 21st century is this fascinating paradox, isn't it? Emerging as both a new kind of economic actor online and simultaneously as this powerful political voice demanding fundamental change, especially on climate.
Which leaves us, and you, with a pretty fundamental question to chew on. What does it actually mean to be a child today, in this world that keeps changing under our feet? And maybe more importantly, what do we as a society genuinely owe our children now? The conversation and the fight for their future is definitely far from over.